details, but make up stuff if it's not any good.
Yeah. Okay. We're live. Welcome to the Lovecraft eZine podcast. And Matt was just asking Bridget what kind of interviews she's doing at Disney. So
they're secret interviews.
They're secret interviews. Okay.
Sort of, but now I'm just doing like a training with industry program. So I'm really just meeting and networking with a lot of people and learning about entertainment, so that hopefully I can take that back to my own field, and we can have some really good discussions about entertainment and things. But I was just telling Mike that listening to him interview a bunch of people on here has been a helpful thing for me to because I have to meet a lot of people over Zoom and Teams and cold ask them questions, and so I've appreciated
learned everything I know from Matthew Carpenter. So
and I learned.
So he's really the one I should credit.
Yeah, I learned everything I know from Catch-22. Who is Hitler? Why is Spain? And where are the Snowdens of yesteryear?
I learned everything about interviewing from Abbott and Costello. Who's on first? Right. Yeah.
There you go.
So, all right.
What?
Anyway. What?
Third base.
All right. So let's do introductions. I'm Mike Davis, Lovecraft eZine guy. Actually, I'm not sure what it is I do. I know podcasting is one of them, publishing books. Got a Michael Sisko book coming up pretty soon. People keep telling me I'll pay $50 for it. Just get it to me first. And I'm like, this is so tempting to actually take them up on that. But yeah, it's a pretty cool book. And maybe this is a big maybe, but Scott Thomas has quite a few books out that I really love and that I think all of us really love. Sea of Ash, of course, being one of them, first book I published. But he's also got a book that I have nothing to do with, like the rest of his books, called Over the Darkening Fields.
Oh, that's a great book.
It is. And if I understand Scott correctly, he's got rights to part 1 and part 3, which is fine with me. And I think it's not on Kindle. So we're thinking of doing something like, and he's got the rights to them. So we're thinking of doing something like with a new cover and just calling it The Darkening Fields, and make it clear that this is what you're getting. But, this book is out of print. So getting this to a new audience would be great, Yep,
2/3 of The Darkening Fields. It's not quite got the ring.
Yeah, we won't use that title, but thank you, Matt. Appreciate it.
Anytime.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Bridget, you want to introduce yourself?
Well, I suppose. Hi, I'm Bridget. I come up with music and I come up with art stuff out of thin air.
Fancy word for compose.
And hopefully it's creepy sometimes.
You musicians with your tech talk.
I do, yes. I am finishing up Haunting Melody, which will go to print fairly soon, and then I will go to all of my beautiful Kickstarter people, and then it will be available on my website. But it's a workbook about composing creepy music.
Rick Lay, writer and pulp magazine collector.
Kevin. No, there's not a Kevin here. Why am I thinking? I was talking to Kevin Scott Joyner. Kevin, introduce yourself. Pete.
And my friend Harvey.
Pete.
Right, Pete.
We're going to call you Kevin today. Just what?
I'm Pete Rollick, so you don't have to be. I write stuff. I read stuff. And I apparently watch the worst movies on the planet.
And we encourage you, especially DeBronzo.
I apparently made DeBronzo's night yesterday.
Now, to answer your question, Matt, that you emailed earlier, this is what's going to happen on April the 8th. And this is not going to be live. It's going to be recorded on Zoom. So basically, if you picture all of us on Zoom right now, watching a really bad movie at the same time and doing kind of a Mystery Science Theater 3000 thing, then I'm going to release it on YouTube and people can start the movie when we did and listen to us batter it to hell all the way through. I forget what movie did DeBronzo pick. It's really horrible, whatever it
Miami Connection.
Yeah. Is that even a horror movie?
Depends how you define horror.
My favorite comment on the was it the YouTube trailer that he sent us? The top comment was, finally a documentary about the real ninja problem in Miami. Cracked me up. Whoever wrote that comment, thank you.
Pete, Dave on the live chat says, I have to thank Pete for introducing me to the alligator people.
Oh yeah, Attack of the Alligator People.
That'll be on your tombstone. The alligator people movie guy.
Yeah, I love that movie.
He wrote books.
That was the first movie that scared me. I was 4 years old or 5 years old.
Matt, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Matt. I'm the idea guy around here.
Okay.
So
whatever.
for our prize, we have a copy of Lovecraft's famous treatise, Supernatural Horror and Literature, annotated by St. Joshi. If you want to win this, send an email to ezineprizes@gmail.com and put HPL in the subject heading. We draw a winner in about 6 weeks, and who knows, maybe it'll be you. Probably not, but you need to re-examine your life choices anyway, so why not enter?
And our special guest today, author Mike. I didn't ask you how to pronounce your last name, Mike. Mike Aronovitz?
That's good enough. Aronovitz. Well, first of all, I'm a fan of Bridget's artwork.
Thank you.
The website's incredible. Also, Matt, you mentioned that the book you have there is annotated by St. Joshi. He's my mentor. If it weren't for St., I wouldn't have anything in print. He ran my first collection through Hippocampus Press. So you're muted, Matt.
I have a copy of that.
Oh, do you really?
I do.
Like all of a sudden I feel famous.
And he wrote the introduction to Dancing with Tombstones, if I remember correctly, the book that we're mainly here to talk about.
Yes, he did. He wrote the foreword for that. I'm very fortunate to know St, and that's a whole story in itself. But I'll just introduce myself.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about you.
Like how I met St.
No, just about you, and what do you do when you're not writing, and that kind of thing.
No worries. I'm a college professor of English. I adjunct at Delaware County Community College, Immaculata, and the University of Delaware. And I also tutor 10 hours a week for the University of Delaware.
And you write, you're a busy guy.
Yeah, a lot of papers to grade. So I'm constantly editing, and I do holistic rating, so it's a lot of writing, which is nice. It makes editing my own stuff a little faster. I'm also a rock critic. I volunteer most of the stuff I do for heavy metal bands and stuff like that, because they've got it hard enough. So I volunteer my articles for Metalheads Forever. But I do freelance some work for Eclipse Records, their deathcore label out of Butler, New Jersey. And I'm a horror writer, and I've been writing horror for about 30 years.
Well, I'm glad you're here. Thank you for joining us. I want to point out a couple of things to the audience. First of all, if you are watching live, which I know is not anywhere near the majority of the people who watch/listen to this show, but if you are watching live and you want to tip us, and a little bit to help the eZine keep going, there's a little $ at the bottom right, and you can do that if you want to. No pressure. Also, I have a Patreon, Lovecraft eZine, patreon.com. eZine, of course, is EZINE. Or you can Google Lovecraft eZine Patreon, and it starts at just $5 a month. And it doesn't take if quite a few people are doing only $5 or $10 a month, then that really helps me pay the bills and so forth. Also, kind of a nice, exciting announcement. The Lovecraft eZine podcast is now on Audible. So I'm really excited about that. So we're on, obviously, YouTube, we're on Spotify, all the usual places, Spotify, we're on Amazon Music, we're on iTunes. You can download it directly from my Liberated syndication site. All those links are, by the way, in the show notes, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening later. And I've also got the link to the Audible. And several of our listeners were kind enough to write some reviews for the Audible site. And I really appreciate that, all of you. And if you guys could keep that up and also do iTunes and Spotify, especially iTunes, I think it really helps the show. So I wanted to point that out. So, all right. So Pete wanted to talk about Automan. Before we get to that,
what? Automan,
your favorite show from the 80s.
Oh my God! With what was it? The Cursor?
Yeah, with Cursor. Poor Cursor. Wow. No. You're really going to treat Cursor this way?
Yes.
Okay. Well, anyway, so Jeffrey Ford, the author Jeffrey Ford, very respected writer. He posts the other day on Twitter. Here, if I can find it. Yeah, here it is. All right. So, if you can see it, which, there we go. There's the cover, if you're watching, of this book. So Jeff goes, just reread Death of a Ghost again the other night. So fucking creepy and unsettling. Too bad Mayfly Press folded. It was only in existence for about 2 years, but in that time they did some great stuff. The name of this book is Death of a Ghost, and it's blurbed by Jeffrey Ford. I haven't been this scared by a novel since I was 10. Leave the light on, pour a stiff drink, and load the revolver. So immediately, me, Paul Tremblay, and a couple of other people are on Twitter, and we're like, Jeff, we can't find this book on Amazon. We can't find this book anywhere. And Jeff's like, well, you guys just need to keep looking. You need to keep looking. And so we do. And I won't say I'm the one who figured this out because I'm just too trusting. After a while, Jeff says, look at today's date. Mm-hmm. And there's no book called Death of a Ghost. So, but he does have a really good book called Crackpot Palace with a very, if you liked the Vigil movie, he's got a short story in there called Sit the Dead, which is very creepy. It's in Crackpot Palace. And another new thing I'm starting today is if you go down to the show notes, everyone complains about all the TBR that the show always adds to them. So I thought I would get official with that and show a link to a few books that you guys can check out. Some of them I've read, some of them I haven't. Let me pull it up here. But there's links to all of them. The Many Lives, or I need to correct this, says The Man Lives. Must be The Many Lives of Samuel Beauchamp by Michael Seamison. The Worm in Every Heart by Gemma Files, Crackpot Palace by Jeffrey Ford, and you can keep going from there. But there's some good ones in there. And a couple of them are like 99 cents, $1.99 on Kindle.
So. All right, so I'm going to add one to that I finished this week.
Oh, please do.
It's from CD Stories and Chris Durston from Skullgate Media, Loathsome Voyages. And right off the bat, the first 3 stories just blew me out of the water. And there's a really feel-good Cthulhu Mythos story in here, which is, I thought I was the only one writing feel-good Mythos stories. There's a story about Tasath Aqua, and then there's a really good cosmic horror story that ended all off. but I got a real good Night Gallery / Twilight Zone feel from this anthology.
Okay, what's the title and author again?
Loathsome Voyages.
Loathsome Voyages by
C.D. Storrs, Storiz, and Chris Durston.
Okay.
I was really impressed.
All right.
So anyway,
that's good to know.
And literally it goes on the shelf.
All right. Well, Kevin Joyner says that there is a new Josh Brolin series, lead actor and executive producer, I guess, coming to Amazon Prime. It's called Outer Range and looks really promising. Have you guys seen the previews for this yet?
I've seen 2 separate previews for this.
Well, what do you think? He says it's like I don't know.
It's got a True Detective first season True Detective feel to it.
Before it went off the rails.
Yeah, that may be true. I mean, there does look like there's something weird going on, but I'm not sure whether it's really weird or just metaphorically weird.
In Outer Range.
Yeah.
He says there's a literal void that opens up on the main character's property, a strange symbol popping up in all sorts of places.
Yes.
And his daughter-in-law has gone missing.
Yep. So I'm gonna give it a shot.
Yeah.
I like Josh Brolin. We'll see what happens. What I don't, what I'd like to see is that, we have a story arc that begins and ends.
That would be nice.
That'd be nice.
That would be nice. Yeah.
Because, a lot of these shows, they do a season and then they don't get picked up again and we're stuck trying to figure out what happened.
Yeah, what the hell? Archive 81. We complained about this last week.
Yep.
By the way, Mike, you don't have to mute. You can throw in conversation anytime you want. So
okay.
All right,
I'm just listening, man. It's good.
Did I explain to the audience we're inverting this? Did I do that already?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm old. I have to. So, yeah, I don't know. Looks good to me too. So I wanted to make the audience aware of it. Thank you, Kevin Joyner. First episode drops April 15th, he says. Do you want to talk about Automan now or wait till later, Pete?
We're never talking about Automan again.
Okay.
I'll tell you what, Mike. When
yes.
Autumn Cthulhu 2 comes out, we can talk about Automan.
Well, give that about another year and a half, and then we can talk about Automan.
Okay.
All right. So Matt Carpenter, aka the Idea Man, as he described himself today, says a few weeks ago, so we were discussing the podcast at dinner, and it occurred to me that my 22 and 23-year-old sons consume media completely differently than I do, seldom watching any sort of mainstream movie or show and often engaging in nonlinear and disjointed ideas. It made me wonder what the landscape will be like in, say, 20 years. So first of all, Matt, explain more in more detail what you mean by that.
I don't know if I can. I'm not a media. There's nothing I made a study of or have any training in.
Sure.
It just, okay, for example, like if my older son hears about a show he likes,
mm-hmm.
and someone tells him the only good episodes are numbers 3, 11, and 12, he'll watch 3, 11, and 12, won't care about anything that came before or after, and just let it go. He has no compunction about consuming a whole series. He will pluck out an anime, a manga book out of order to enjoy it. A lot of their stories is based on role-playing games and also the story content of video games, because even something is sort of like commonly known as Mario, there is a story that's going on while you're playing the game.
Yeah.
I find that they rapid fire memes across to each other, and all the memes are like meta, referring to a meme, referring to a meme, referring to a joke that may have been made by someone on the internet at some point. They neither one likes watching a TV or particularly going to a movie theater. It's all on their computer screen or their phone. I feel like they're reading like not quite a commonplace book as opposed to a collection of short stories. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or abbreviations of things. Neither one has a huge grounding in like classic cinema. My oldest son has a lot of classical Greek, Roman, Norse myth grounding, but not a lot of the same literature that I thought of was like the standard basis that we all had been consumed that gave us a common ground. It just got me thinking that is the generation a couple generations after us, is it even going to look, the story consumption, is it even going to be the same? I just was wondering if anyone else had any.
But there's a lot of story consumption. My son likes horror, for example, but he doesn't really listen to audiobooks or read too much. He watches some horror movies, and mostly what he does is he listens to horror stories on YouTube, like creepypastas and stuff like that. He recommended one to me the other day that was, I thought, absolutely terrifying. And you know, these videos get hundreds of thousands of listens, if not more. You know, and that's how he's consuming horror. And he gets these 20, 30-minute stories. You know, they're basically short stories.
Yeah,
audibly told.
My sons wouldn't give a whoop if movie theaters went out of existence, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Reading the daily newspaper, it's almost not a concept. I just didn't know, like other people with.
You still get the paper?
I'll look at it if someone else gets it, but I'm too chintzy.
Okay.
But I don't know if like anyone else with younger children or younger friends has similar experiences as to what younger people are doing now.
I don't know. My son's almost 19, and I would say some of that's the same and some of it's different, but some of it's just his personality. He will watch a series from beginning to end, and it upsets him a lot to watch stuff out of order. But on the other hand, he is very much into YouTube and like the creepypasta stuff too, or like learning about history or even just things like that from BuzzFeed, you know, BuzzFeed Unsolved, and getting into things like that and watching a lot of videos.
Yeah, and they're all, it seems like a lot of them, they do more than one thing at a time, and they're very good at it. And I'm not criticizing that at all. I'm just saying that's just the way that it seems to be going. They'll listen to a creepypasta while they're playing a game, you know, that sort of thing. You know, they're like Pete.
Yeah. No, that's a good analogy. One of the things that I've noticed is, and this is why I try to work with my kids and give them a moviecation, and try to ground them in some things, is that some of the cultural references that we assume everybody should have, they don't have.
Right.
Because
That's very true.
You know, we made a joke the other night that came up in a movie. Don't go into the light. Go into the light. Go into the light. And like, the kids had never seen Poltergeist. They have no reference for that, so they don't get it.
So basically, this is the old person version of the show, part of the show today, where these kids just don't get it, you know?
No, it's just the changing landscape because.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I know. I'm kidding.
Now, listen, when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, we didn't have video on demand. And if you missed an episode of a TV show, you never got to see it again.
Yeah.
Maybe not for a year, maybe 2 years. Maybe if it got caught up in syndication. We didn't have unlimited access to old comics, and we didn't even, we barely had comic book shops. My comic books came at a 7-Eleven, and they got 3 copies of a few books. And if you didn't get that copy, you missed. So, and then, the other thing I'll point out is that Sesame Street taught them to look at narratives in like 2 to 3 minute, taught us to look at narratives in like 2 to 3 minute segments. And that just primed us for MTV, right? We thought that everything could be solved in a 3-minute segment. And later on, as we got older, we would sit for 30 minutes. Get to a sitcom.
I don't even mean to like imply that the tastes of younger people aren't equivalently valid to like anyone else.
Yeah.
But they just aren't like having the same, like pop music, everything about that's ephemeral. And when you're really young, you think pop music this is music for forever. Cause I remember like thinking about the Beatles, like, this is like the greatest music ever written. It's like, and now it's like, my sons scarcely know anything from their catalog. So, of course, like when you're older, these jokes and the music that you listen to, they no longer become common touchstones with younger people. But like in the 60s, there were very famous novels. Like in the 50s, isn't that when The Bell Jar came out? And The Catcher in the Rye. And then in the 60s and 70s, there are novels that came out. But now it's like, I just don't see my sons reading all those novels that are coming out today. Like
you mean like we were forced to read, I don't know, Ethan Frome?
Well, Ethan Frome is a special form of torture, and I even had to write a sequel to it. I wrote a sequel to Ethan Frome for class once.
I would imagine though that if I was talking to my grandfather, he would say something pretty similar.
I just don't know. Like it's like, okay, I think movie theaters are dinosaurs. Unless you can do something else to get people in there.
Yeah.
If you can't really make art music relevant to younger people or bigger audiences, orchestras are going to die on the vine. You know what I mean? Maybe in New York you'll have, or Chicago, you'll have the Chicago Symphony, but a small town like Peoria with our symphony playing like 6-7 concerts a year, very, very few young people go to any of that. And I just think it's not, it's really just the way that, like, I remember Leonard Bernstein. Do you remember him? Like, he did these TV shows in the 50s and early 60s, introducing classical music to young people on network TV. But even if he were doing something like that today, my sons wouldn't see it because they're not going to watch TV.
Well, it's interesting to see just on the orchestra topic specifically of how orchestras have tried to catch up with newer audiences, and they've been doing concerts that are, Marvel music and movie music, and there's a lot more immersive type experiences like Star Wars in concert, for instance, and where you see the video along with the music being played live and things like that to try and appeal to younger audiences.
And then there's TikTok.
Yes.
What are those 30 to 60 seconds at most? All right, so here's a question from eZine follower Ryan Whitley. Very good question. He wrote, I think most of us could agree that we're in a new golden age of horror and weird fiction, and have been for the past decade or so. My question is why? What are the outside influences and variables that have contributed to this fertile time? There's some very good answers in there. Stephen Smith, and I would like to hear what you guys think, says I'd say it's a reflection of how weird, aka fucked up, real life has become. I respectfully, Steve, I'm not sure if I buy it because real life has always been fucked up.
I have something to say about it, Mike.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I don't know if it's a golden age of horror, But Stephen King was an anomaly, and I'm one of those people that thought, oh, everybody just loves this. But horror has never been a popular genre. It sort of isn't a genre at all. It's a spice. Yeah, there's horror in every drama. There's horror in any impending peril. I don't care if it's romance. But the thing that's happened with self-publishing and with the Big Five and all their imprints just going with their sure things and wiping out kind of the horror sections, like Random House just brought up a horror section like it's a new thing. The small market is the golden age. The small market presses and even like the mid-range independents have really made it so, like, horror to me is like heavy metal. It's like a cockroach. You can't kill it. It doesn't matter whether it's in vogue or not. And the small market.
It's like, if I can interrupt you to agree, I was listening to an interview with Joe Hill the other day, and he was talking about how, you know, he at first no one knew he was Stephen King's son, so he was just another writer trying to, you know, get something published. And his first break was PS Publishing, and because Peter liked his story, and Joe Hill's point was that small press publishing they do exactly what you just said, Mike. They are publishing stories because they love them and want them to be out there.
Exactly. I mean, they actually care about the fiction, which sounds so silly to say. Like, it seems like it's just a 1 + 1 = 2, but it just doesn't anymore. And in the small market, you really can. It's hard to break into that too. I mean, a lot of these small market presses like Subterranean, you know, I don't know about Nightshade. I didn't need an agent to get into Nightshade or Cemetery Dance. But the reason why I broke into those is because Chismar really liked a novel that I did for Centipede Press, and all they did is put out the collectible, you know, the hard copy, so the paperback and electronic was available. And Richard actually pursued that because he liked the story. It's not me he liked. I'm certainly not famous. I mean, I haven't sold millions and millions of copies, and I'll never forget that, man. I'll be loyal to that guy until the day I die. He actually published something because he liked it. There's no bigger compliment. I mean, the ones I haven't been lucky enough to get into are like Flame Tree, Raw Dog Screaming Press. I've heard a lot of good things about. I really want to meet the guy who runs Crystal Lake, because Kevin Lucia, you know, the editor handling my book at Cemetery Dance, he publishes through Crystal Lake, and he said the guy who owns that really cares about the fiction. And then there's like Apex and Subterranean, which I've never even talked to them. But yeah, Centipede, Hippocampus, Cemetery Dance, Nightshade, Skyhorse.
Okay, so
can I just Dark Regions. They've all been very good to me, Matt.
So the thing is, you're talking about the presence of these small presses making the difference. And I'd say maybe, but there have been small presses going back ages, and they have the lifespan of a mayfly.
Yes, but the difference now is the internet.
The difference of the internet. It's not the internet so much; it's the social media aspect that came into fruition about 15 years ago. If you don't want to credit Facebook too much, but the idea of like having a Lovecraft eZine presence on Facebook, because it was about 2009-10 that there's an avalanche of Lovecraftian books that started coming out from all kinds of presses. And I think it's because suddenly it was a much more focused form of advertising and distribution than before, because you could focus it with social media.
Isn't that interesting, though, that we were talking about young kids and they're all fragmented because of the same thing, but it's the social media and the innovation in that part of it that made the small horror market blend and bond. That's really interesting, Matt.
And then the thing is, after a few years, and you know, there's backlash against Lovecraft. Oh, his prose is boring. Oh, he's racist, anti-Semite. Oh, I don't do Lovecraft. But what it did was it opened a door to let lots of weird fiction in. Mm-hmm. So now it's not just, say, it was really striking to me. It went from a few books a year to like 100 books a year but now it's all over the place in weird, dark fiction, not just like a lot of, I guess, subgenre horror. But I just think that followed the Lovecraftian wave. It was sort of permissive.
And I think it's the combination. I agree with you about the social media, Matt, but I think it's the combination of not just the social media. That is very important. But also it is easier to self-publish, or for a small press publisher to actually get the book out there. And then, it's two parts. First part is getting a quality book out there. Nice presentation, an actual good story, and so forth. And the second part is other people have to know about it, which is where social media comes in hugely. So I think that has a lot to do with it.
It's also that a lot of the old horror is now free online.
Yeah.
I compare this to when I was collecting Lovecraft in the 70s. I had to scour paperback stores. There was stories that were only published by Arkham House, which you wouldn't know about unless you had some inside information. And now you can go online, you get everything that Lovecraft wrote. You get everything that Clark Ashton Smith wrote.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much a lot of stuff, nearly everything that Robert E. Howard wrote.
So if you look at the history of the genre, and more particularly the history of fandom, the first World Fantasy Convention is what, 76, something like that?
75.
Right? But only the people in the know go to it. I grew up outside Philadelphia. One of the world's oldest and largest fandom is in Philadelphia. I never saw one bit of advertising for PhilCon or the Philadelphia Science Fiction Society ever growing up.
It's funny, Pete. I'm age peers with all of the Providence pals.
Yeah.
They were going to college and I was going to college. I had no clue.
Right.
I would have been
only if you were in the know.
I would have been yipping up and down to be included in that club,
So what happens in my mind is that, and this is from my collecting point of view, you brought it up, you had to scour paperback and trade places for stuff. And I can remember getting my first book catalog, either from Soft Books or Dreamhaven, and getting on the phone to call up and order something, and it was gone.
Mm-hmm.
If you didn't, the day the catalog arrived, if you didn't call, that rare book that you wanted, it was gone because everybody else in the country was doing it. And then Abe Books hits, and suddenly you can, the playing field is more open. Hundreds, if not thousands, of book dealers are now reaching across the country, and everybody
Plus all
can,
the used book dealers that are on Amazon,
right,
that kind of thing.
But at the same time, what's happening is that science fiction societies are going online too. So now you can bring everybody together that only could ever meet like locally or at a con. Now, you can advertise and say, hey, come to our meeting. And, suddenly like people in West Palm Beach are going to Miami for a science fiction meeting. And that's pretty cool. Mm-hmm. But then through the 2000s and to now, you start to realize that science fiction society isn't really what you're there for. You don't want just people who are into science fiction. And I'll give you an example. We used to do like a monthly movie outing. And, we would go to see the new Star Trek or the new comic book movie or a zombie film or a horror film. And somebody flat out said, what are we going to go see this month? And it's like, well, the only thing really out is like the new, the remake of Night of the Living Dead. And somebody said, oh God, not another zombie movie. And, what people realized was that they could find their own niche if they just looked for it. So if you weren't into Star Trek or Star Wars and you were into zombies, there was a whole community out there that would cater to you.
Yeah.
And just your interest.
Excellent point.
So the fandom starts to break apart. And what used to unite you, because at least there was, like, even if you go back to 20s and 30s, like, there's only a handful of magazines writing this stuff. So if you found somebody else who read Weird Tales, that was your friend. Now you just want the guy who's into hardcore, core Cthulhu Mythos stuff, just by Lovecraft, nobody else. And you can find them. There's a Facebook page for it. Or if you like what Brian Lumley's done, there's a Facebook page for that. So the whole fandom is breaking apart and becoming niches.
The other thing is, and you're basically alluding to this, but it allows people with interests in common to be together. For example, we do this every Sunday. We started off as a live video chat because we like seeing each other. I know many people listen to it in their cars and so forth and enjoy it. And I'm really glad that they do. But that's how all of this started. We just wanted to stay in contact instead of seeing each other once a year at a convention.
In many ways, to me, this is our Calum Club.
Right.
Referring to, Lovecraft's New York Circle. Except that we're all scattered around the country, if not around the world.
Speaking of rare books, I did something really stupid. I've already told you guys this, but I'll tell the audience now. So I knew it before, but I realized again last night that Alan Dean Foster wrote the novelization of The Thing. And of course, back then, he wasn't writing it off of the movie. He was writing it off the screenplay. And so what you get is a different version, and many times a better version. If that's blasphemy, I don't know. But so I'm like, okay, I'm going to get this book. I want to tell my audience about it. There's like 230,000 people on the Facebook page. So I'm like, hey guys, just want to let you know this is out there. There's a couple of them for $11. And I'm not thinking, this morning I get back on there on Amazon and they're gone. There's like $175, $80,
Yeah.
So, and Pete won't send me his copy that's signed by Alan. So
it's one of the treasures that I keep in my cabinet.
No, I know.
It's right up there with my Pugmires and my Centipede Precedent.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't give away my Pugmires or my Pulvers or my Pete Rollicks or John Padgett or So let's see, what else do we talk?
You mentioned John Padgett. I am so excited to do this, to go to this thing that they're doing in Orlando next month.
When is that again?
I think it's May 5th. I gotta check.
Yeah.
I'm excited to hear about it. I wish I could go. That's so cool.
He's going to do Thomas Ligotti readings, and he's going to do he's going to have an orchestra backing him up, or band, or I can't remember. I've got the LPs, so I don't have to go.
John Padgett's going to be there. Matt Bartlett's going to be there. I'm going to go up.
Yeah.
So
should be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then we got Necronomicon coming up in August. It's coming right up. Anyway, good news. Rick finally saw The Big Lebowski. Right, Rick?
Yeah. There's always something that gets caught in the cracks.
That's right. So you saw Moon Knight. So no spoilers. What did you think?
I thought it was great.
Couple of, is there 2 episodes out? Is that right?
Just one episode.
Just one. I thought it was really good. It intrigued me, so I'll be watching the rest of them.
I have to say, I know nothing about Moon Knight. Is he like the Marvel Batman, or is something different?
Yeah, he's a little bit more. He's comparable.
He started out as a Marvel Batman, and then they thrown this angle of multiple personalities existing inside him.
Okay.
That's kind of made him unique. And in fact, they've deliberately eliminated the element that made him like Batman.
Okay.
He had a Bruce Wayne personality. And that's not in the show.
So are you saying Marvel Batman in that he doesn't have superpowers?
He originally started out as a rich guy with a lot of gadgets.
Gotcha.
The thing Batman, Blue Beetle, whatever.
But now he's kind of supernatural, right?
Then they put in the supernatural angle and they put in multiple personalities.
And my wife is an English teacher. And you guys are writers, readers. I want everyone to remember how important it is to get things right. There's an article on CNN to get, the English right, to get the writing the way that it should be, right, Pete? Here's the headline. A pastor baptized people for decades using one wrong word. Now all of these baptisms are considered invalid.
Yes. This happened a couple of months ago.
Yes. A Catholic priest has resigned after a church investigation found he performed invalid baptisms throughout most of his more than 20-year career. He would say, "We baptize you in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit." But Olmsted explained the words, "We baptize" should have been "I baptize" instead. So all of you who are, I just think it's a good example to all of you cultists out there that are trying to raise Lovecraftian entities, maybe learn from this guy. Don't make the same mistake, because you don't want to call up that which you cannot put down.
There's a story about this. John Brunner's The Pronounced Effect.
Really?
Yeah. There's it's about a professor, a woman who is going to a conference on dead languages, and she has this radical theory about how a certain language should be pronounced, and she uniquely recites some phrase, and for the first time in thousands of years, it's right. And she summons a minor demon who then goes and attends the conference with her.
Okay.
But she doesn't know it.
I think I read that in some anthology. Do you?
I think it's in Weird Tales.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Right. Well, before we get to Mike, on a lighter note, one more thing, unless you guys have more. Here's an NPR, huh?
Yeah, I have one thing on Moon Knight.
Okay, let me read this. This is actually really neat. NPR article, press 3 for a pep talk from kindergartners. A new hotline gives you options for joy. My wife told me about this. Yeah, all kidding aside, a lot of us in the arts, writing, whatever, creatives, we sometimes battle depression and other mental issues. And I just thought this was kind of neat, kind of a really good news thing. Here's the article. Amid a crush of heavy news from around the world, who couldn't use some sage advice right now? Call a new hotline and you'll get that. You'll get just that, encouraging words from a group of kindergartners. If you're feeling mad, frustrated, or nervous, press 1. If you need words of encouragement and life advice, press 2. If you need a pep talk from kindergartners, press 3. If you need to hear kids laughing with delight, press 4. And Danielle and I tried this thing out, and it's just so cute.
We did it.
Did you?
Yeah, we did it in the car when we were driving home from someplace.
It's just, you can't help but bring a smile to your face when you do
it's kind of funny. It's got to be the worst recording I've ever heard, but
that's part of the charm.
Yeah, it's just, imagine, it's like herding cats. Getting kindergartners to do anything in concert is horrific. So
here is the number, because this is a real thing. 707 707-998-8410. That's 707-998-8410. Of course, it's a USA number. So, Rick, you have something?
Yeah, I just, when I was watching Moon Knight, and we see, this is in all the trailers, so I'm not giving anything away. The central character talks to another of his personalities as it appears in a mirror. So he's talking to himself. And I've seen that in a lot of movies. They had it in the first Spider-Man movie with the Norman Osborn and the Green Goblin. I'm trying to think of when did that originate in movies? And the earliest I can trace it back to is a movie with Edward G. Robinson called Flesh and Fantasy, made in the 40s. Does anybody remember anything earlier?
Well, you were there, Matt. Do you remember anything?
I don't remember what I had for breakfast. Remember the back 40 years? Good luck.
So the 40s, which movie was this again?
Flesh and Fantasy.
Flesh and Fantasy.
It was a trilogy of supernatural stories. The middle segment is Edward D. Robinson, an adaptation of Oscar Wilde's The Lord Arthur Saville's Crime, where he's a man who his palm is read by a fortune teller, and the fortune teller says you're going to commit a murder. And he sort of developed a split personality because urging him to kill somebody randomly to get this prediction off his mind.
Right. I'll have to watch that. Last but not least, Starman. Rewatched it recently.
Okay, well, I got something else.
Yeah, that's fine too. We can keep talk. I mean, we can talk more after we talk to Mike, but that movie really holds up in my view. You know, am I wrong? Even though it's an 80s movie, early 80s, really, 82, 83, something like that. Somewhere around the Tron era.
Yeah, I've watched it a couple times. It still holds up.
Yeah. It was made around the time they made E.T. because that was the debate whether the studio that didn't pick up E.T. made Starman instead.
Then they did a Starman TV show, but I think that got canceled after less than a year. So, Pete?
It got kind of convoluted. The story, I think, had good intentions, but the movie is so good.
Yeah. I've watched the two first episodes of Halo.
Why? Because you watch crappy.
No,
stuff.
I've watched them too.
And I'm just not thrilled.
Well, here's the deal, Pete. Tell me what you think of this. The main character is supposedly imbued with chemicals that prevent him from emoting.
Yeah.
So the main character is the main character who they're showing on screen a lot has a deadpan face, and this is his delivery. For example, if they ask him a question, he'll think for a second and go, "No."
Yeah.
Well, I can.
It's like watching Kevin Costner.
Hey, don't you diss John Dutton, Mister.
I'm just saying that Kevin.
You are so lucky that my wife is not listening to this right now.
But it's a beautiful show.
Yeah,
beautifully made.
Yeah, it's stunning.
It's just there's not much substance.
Yeah.
You've been saying that for years, that Kevin Costner makes a great father figure that's kind of distant from his kids, something like that. And then Yellowstone. And every time I watch an episode of Yellowstone, I think of what you said and saying for the last 8 years.
If you look, Waterworld, Dances with Wolves, the
Man of Steel.
Daughter, the new daughter. What is it? What did you say?
Please. New daughter. Yeah, the new daughter.
Oh my God! Awesome. Why'd you bring up Waterworld? I had blotted it from my head.
If anyone listening has not watched The New Daughter, it's very Lovecraftian and it's very good.
If you have a main character who's male and over 30 and under 80, who is emotionally distant and unable to express himself, Kevin Costner is the actor for you. Because he's done it all the time, and he's really good at it.
I just really hope that Danielle doesn't hear you diss John Benton. That's so. Let's talk to Mike, our special guest. So,
hey, man.
Bridget. So yeah.
Goodness.
So, Mike, you've got a book called Dancing with Tombstones, right? It's a collection. Bridget, you want to start us off? You were really impressed with this book, I know, and so was I.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, give the listeners out there a little bit about what Dancing with Tombstones is about.
That's my cue.
That's your cue.
That's my cue. When the pandemic hit and everybody was quarantined, I don't do fucking crossword puzzles. So, right. And I've never been really good at tech, and Mike Davis knows this. And I was terrified to do Zoom. At the colleges, the three basic platforms that you do partially online or online classes are Canvas, Moodle, and Blackboard. And, Immaculata has Moodle, UDEL has Canvas. And I did as little as possible up until the pandemic. And then I took every course I could. I took 2 courses on Canvas. I took a course on Zoom, and I made it so I could be an online teacher. But then when that's all done and I've taught my Zoom classes, I had a lot of downtime, like never before. And I did kind of what every writer, I would imagine, would love to do. I took all of the stories that I wrote 30 years ago, the ones that I wrote half a year ago, and I rewrote all of them. Some of them were just a lube job. Some of them I had to totally demolish and reinvent the vehicle. And some didn't make the cut, like some that I thought were okay. They weren't good enough for this. So what you're getting is at least in my world, you're getting my best stories modernized, polished, and redone. And I was really lucky that Cemetery Dance picked it up. And Bridget, thank you for reading the stories. That means a lot to me.
Yeah, it's great. I was saying before we went live that it's, usually it's a compliment to say, oh, I couldn't put it down. But like in this case, it's a compliment to say I had to put it down some nights because it was so creepy. I would read one story before bed and I'd just be like, I can't start another one because I knew once I started it, I'd have to finish it. And then
I was going to ask you, Bridget, because you read a lot of horror, you don't scare easily. And so I was just wanting to ask you before you keep interviewing Mike. So what do you think is different about this book that just maybe frightened you or creeped you out more than a lot of other horror collections or books?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And dang it, now I'm getting interviewed. No, so I think, Mike, what really,
and that is kind of an on the spot question, because
Mike and Michael. I think
we should have had your husband here and the Bronzo.
It would just be Mike.
Mikes.
Mike. What day is it, Mike? It's Sunday. Anyway. I digress. So I think what it is, Michael, with your stories is that the writing is wonderful, first of all, but
Thank you. That might. I'm sorry.
The way that you're able to get in the heads of some of these people, especially in the section entitled Psychos, because there are different sections of this book. Let me pull it up so that I don't mess it up.
Girls,
yeah,
Psychos, Tools and Tech, and Martyrs and Sacrificial Lambs.
Yes, and I love the way the stories are grouped as well, but just the way you're able to get into different people's heads. And so when you're starting a story, you're okay, well, this is the protagonist, but we don't know if this is, a predator or a prey. When we start reading it, and we kind of find out as we go along, especially the story about the woman who is an obsessive cleaner.
Oh, the OCD story.
Yes, I keep thinking about that story to this day, and it just makes me cringe. It was very captivating.
Thank you for that. That was the easiest story in the world to do. Doris Wadowitz, the lead character in that was my mother. Now she didn't have OCD. She had a lot of other issues, but the physical specimen and just the way she would think and the way she would rationalize things and the way things would frighten her, that was easy to do. That was the only time I've ever really done. Yeah, you know how you write stuff and your parents, everything you write, they're like, you're writing about me. This was one that I really did.
Oh my gosh. I mean, because at first when you're reading it, you can imagine thinking her thoughts of, oh gosh, yeah. And now just going about your day. Well, now this is dirty. I got to clean this. And yeah. And then it just gets to a point where you're like, where would I have drawn the line?
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah. I mean, for me, I have a little bit of that OCD thing. I mean, nothing that I'd go to an analyst for, but I think that sometimes I don't trust life and I don't trust myself. And like up in this room here, I do my ironing, for school. And then I'm the one who gets up early. I wake up at 4:30 every morning. So I make the coffee. So at the end of the day, when I'm about to go out to class, I'll think, did I unplug the iron? Right. Mm-hmm. And I'll come back in the house and I'll go upstairs and I'll look at the iron. And while I'm looking at the iron, I'm thinking, did I unplug the coffee pot? Right. And then I'll go down and I'll check that. And then I was like, well, I really wasn't paying attention to the iron. So I better go back upstairs. And I do that song and dance about 3 times before I leave. I mean, that doesn't mean I have puddles follow me into the house like Doris or,
Mike, have you ever read Stephen King's story with an OCD character, whereas OCD actually might be saving the world? It's a novella called In. The letter.
I've
N
never read it, and I thought I had read almost everything in.
My gosh, you have to listen. You have to. Well, it's on audiobook, and the listen is really great because they do 3 different narrators. Or if you're more in, if you're not an audiobook person, it's in. Is it Nightmares and Dreamscapes? Pete?
I read Nightmares and Dreamscapes years ago.
No, it's not.
Everything's Eventual?
No, it's not in that one. I'm looking it up right now. Just After Sunset. But I have to tell you, if this is a topic that you wrote about, you care enough to write, that you really have to read this story. And then you have to email me and tell me what you think of this story. This is quite possibly one of my favorite Stephen King stories. So.
Oh, no worries, man.
Anyway,
sure.
Go on.
Yeah. So just those inner thoughts, that I think we all kind of have. And then at some point in the story, you're like, wait, would I have had that inner thought though? Or wouldn't I have? Like, it's just really good writing. And I also, you said that story is about your mom. So I have to ask you, of course, if the professor's story within a story within a story, if you pulled on some personal experience for that one.
Oh, are you talking about the meta story, the girl between the slats?
Yes.
Well, yeah. Not stuff about the kid, but I used a lot of my knowledge of public schools and then teaching in college to do that one, because I had to take a guy and put him through all walks of his life. And he starts out to be a public school teacher. And then, he's an adjunct, like I am now. And then I use the knowledge of the business and he becomes, he has a doctorate and then he's the dean. So, yeah, I think that another question that we could ask, and this one amazingly doesn't bother my students at all when they read the last one in the girls section, The Sculptor, is about a guy who knows a college campus because he's a security guard, and he also closes out a supermarket. He's part-time in both places, so he has access to the meat room. And it's about a guy who kills college co-eds and impales them on poles and puts them in highway job sites. and everybody calls them scarecrows. And my female students,
I think that's so wrong.
Well, I would hope that you think so.
I don't care how many people disagree with me. I'm gonna go out on the stand right now and say that's wrong.
It is, and that's why it sells. But it's funny. I don't get a lot of my students saying to me, that's weird. Like, where did you think of that? Now you scare me. I get that from some of my friends, but my students are more that they get. I think I'm a cool teacher. I'm not a hard grader. But I think that they want to please me. So a lot of times they just want to prove to me that they read it instead of internalizing it and thinking, well, why is he talking about, murder and stuff like that? And I mean, back to my mom, she was the one who taught me to go into text and analyze stuff and analyze people. She was really into psychology and stuff like that. So for me, when I write, I have to fully understand the character. If I don't, I can't write them,
Yeah, for sure. That's interesting. You said your mom was a psychologist, because in the novella that's in there too, it's like it very, very much has like a feeling of Stand By Me, or the body of those those boys, that are just at that age, and the way they talk and the things they talk about, and him talking about his mom being a psychiatrist, I think.
Without a doubt. Yeah, his mom is very psychological. You know what? Come to think of it, I did model that after her as well. That one has an interesting story. Can I story tell a little bit?
Of course.
Bridget is talking about the one that I put in the middle of Dancing with Tombstones.
The toll booth guy.
Yeah, the toll booth story. That was my first novel. I took a class when I was about 31 years old. It was 1992. And I took a short story class by a guy named Ken Bingham, who is really good with just welcoming all genres and getting people to write. It was an adult enrichment class. And I published my first 4 short stories out of there. And then I broke off. It's the kind of class people take over and over again. I took it for a year and a half, had a whole new circle of friends. My life changed. I loved it. And that's when I decided to become a teacher. I was a salesman before that. Oh, wow. And I didn't know how to write a freaking novel, and it was just when computers were like PCs were starting to crop up. And I hand wrote a novel called Mischief, and I modeled it after a kid that I knew growing up who was just bad to the bone. And I was very vulnerable, and I was a follower. So I kind of modeled it after those 2 kids. And the nutshell of it for people who haven't read it is that these 2 kids are messing around. They're in middle school, and they're messing around making mischief on a job site that's been abandoned. And there's an overpass where a road leads down. People have stolen the don't enter signs, and they throw hand nails in the middle of the dirt road in the middle of the job site to see what'll happen.
Yeah,
and a woman comes down and pops her tires, hits a tree, and you hear, her head's on the wheel. And another kid knew they were going up that day, so they have to hide the body. And that's what that story is about. So
the stronger friend goes into full-on sociopathic mode of let's take care of this.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Like he's in his element, and right. the other kid is just dragged along. Right. So I wrote it longhand, and it took me 3 years, and it was 1,000 pages. And I always knew that the beginning was kind of cool, but the rest of it was contrived, and I wasn't ready for such a big project. And I gave up on it. I never went back to it because it was too recent, and it felt like picking at the dead, and I couldn't solve all the problems. And then what happened in 2007, I had communications with S.T. Joshi, and he liked 4 of my stories. And he said, I'll run them through Hippocampus, but you only have 40,000 words. I need another 40. And I thought, I'm going to find that novel. But in a cleansing process, I had thrown the computer away. I had thrown away all copies. I didn't have it. And my cousin Jonah still had it in its mailing box. He had never opened it, thank goodness, or he would have thrown it. He would have thrown it out, right? It was that bad. And he sent it back to me, and I used it as a template. And I took a couple of months and just focused on the beginning part. And did. I guess a theme of at least my part in this show is that rewriting is key. You can always come back to it, and you can always make it better. And you're always older. You're always a better writer. You always know a little bit more. You're always a little more empathetic because you know more people. And yeah, rewriting, that's where it's at. So that's where that came from. Thank you for talking about that. That piece I wrestled with for a big part of my life.
Oh my gosh, that's such a great story too, because I think as artists, especially when we're just out of college or something like that, and we just feel so much pressure to put something brilliant out there. And the reality is that you just have to get stuff down and create a bunch of stuff. Or even as one of my teachers said, you just got to write a bunch of crap. And then eventually there's something good in there. And then, like you said, it may just be the right idea, but the wrong time. And you just have to go back to it later and make something.
One book I read about writing, it basically said, don't get caught up in writing, just write. And if 95% of it is crap, that means that 5% of it is gold. And just keep editing, rewriting, get rid of the chaff, keep the gold, and rinse and repeat. I'm sorry, Matt, you were going to say something?
Well, we've talked about before the concept of 10,000 hours to mastery of something. To be really good at something, there's no putting aside the necessary slog to acquire the skills. That is, if you want to be a great pianist, if you want to be a really good surgeon, if you want to be a writer, is it really a shock that a lot of people get their first really big novel break when they're in their 30s because they dedicated their 20s to writing a lot of stuff where they were honing their skills, learning from other people? I mean, how many people are going to go back and reread Aragon? Maybe not so many, but something that's come after, like you say, all that time you spent writing it, that wasn't a waste of time.
No.
That was preparing you for the future.
I also want to point out the importance of encouragement when you're in a fragile state as an artist or a writer or whatever creative thing that you're doing. When someone, like in your case, ST, or my case, other people, says, hey, keep doing what you're doing, don't stop, you're onto something here, that's great. And if you don't get the encouragement, you can't use it as an excuse to not do the work. But it sure helps to have the encouragement.
Yeah, and a lot of times, especially writing horror, there isn't a lot of people behind you. I mean, I always thought everybody loved Stephen King. But as soon as I started writing horror, a lot of people, like in my family and close to me, were like, why? And it was because, like, it's the way I see the cloud. It's just the way things are. I try to tell my students, that's why you don't hand something in the night, like you don't write it the night before. Because, you have the opportunity to be your own editor. The first time you write something, you should be crazy. You should be like wearing the John Lennon glasses with the horseshoe head and you got the ponytail.
Right, drunk, edit, sober.
Right. And you're throwing paint on the canvas and crawling through it and finger painting with it, driving your tricycle across it. But then you got to come back to it like a different artist the next day. Like now you're Pierre with the little mustache and the beret, and you're like, oh, I'm going to move this stuff around. I mean, I'm going to tell you right now, I like being the editor far more than the drafter. I hate drafting. Drafting is a fucking knife fight with myself. And if I don't come out bloody, it's not good enough. And I hate it. But then I hate going to sleep after it because I feel like it sucks. But then I wake up the next morning, I can go and I can start rearranging things. And
looking at it with fresh eyes.
Without a doubt. And I would tell people who are just starting to write fiction, even if you're doing like a big old novel, whether you're an outliner or a discovery writer, that's a whole different conversation. But you don't want to keep working the same paragraph over and over again for a year, because it's never going to be good enough. But with me, I hate drafting so much, and I'm addicted to editing, and I can speed read, and I can kind of do it fast because I grade 150 papers in a week. I never draft more than 2 pages in a day, but I'll go back and edit 20, and I'm always editing a new 20, but it's the same 18 and going like that, or whatever the math is. But it's always draft 2 and go back 20. And that's the way I do it. But yeah, drafting is a nightmare for me.
I was at a reading by John Sanford, the mystery writer, and he talked about his work ethic, and I think he does like 6 hours a day, 4 days a week, and to write the novel. And then somebody asked him, well, after you've written it, how do you edit? And he says, oh no,
I'm done.
I worked 20 years as a copy editor. We write things once, and we never go back. And if you make a mistake, you just work with it. And that to me is stunning. That, if you never go back, that means you have to have everything planned up before.
Right. But that brings up another point. I have a running argument with Chet Williamson, a friendly argument.
I love Chet.
Yeah, he's been nice enough to read a couple of my things and give me some advice. And I'm just this crazy dude on Facebook, like, oh, I love you. And he's like he's a nice guy. But he was on a podcast and he said, I believe in what Richard Matheson believes in, that when you're writing a novel, you have to know exactly what you're going to do every day, and you have to know the last line. And he goes, if you're a discovery writer, that's like jumping off a cliff and hoping for a hang glider. And I'll jump off that cliff all day. I mean, how am I going to know how a novel ends when I started? It's 350.
There's
I mean, I'm going to be a different person in a year. It's going to take me about a year.
There's 2 different schools of thought there, and I don't think either one of them is right or wrong. You mentioned the pandemic, and it gave you this time that you wanted to write. Stephen King's got a book coming up called Fairy Tale that I'm very much looking forward to. But as many of us early in the pandemic, it was pretty depressing. Still is, but especially then. And I'm reading right now from his website. Early in the pandemic, King asked himself, what could you write that would make you happy? And this is a quote from him. As if my imagination had been waiting for the question to be asked, I saw a vast deserted city, deserted but alive. I saw the empty streets, the haunted buildings, a gargoyle head lying overturned in the street. I saw smashed statues of what I did not know, but I eventually found out. I saw a huge sprawling palace with glass towers so high their tips pierced the clouds. These images released the story that I wanted to tell. In other words, he started with this image, and then that created the story. Mike Flanagan told me with his movie Absentia that he had no idea what the story was going to be, but it started with a spooky tunnel near his house at the time.
That's exactly the way I do it, Mike. I usually start with something that's somewhere in the text, and I make the story around it that'll make it make sense. My first novel, Alice Walks, not Mischief, the one that didn't work. This one actually did. And this was after I did the collection with ST. So my first novel, post ST Joshi meeting. I had no idea what to write. So I'm actually in this office, and I was Googling Bloody Mary. I thought I'm going to do a longer story of Bloody Mary. And I didn't know what it was. Like, I remember you said something in a mirror, and I found it on Google, and it's not much better. It's that you say Bloody Mary 3 times, and in the image behind you, there's a bloody lady with a bloody baby, and she throws it at you. And I thought, that kind of sucks. And all of a sudden, and I don't know where this stuff comes from, but all of a sudden I thought, it's the first night of November snow, and I'm in a graveyard. And I'm down by a mausoleum that has caution tape around it. And there's this 14-year-old girl in a green burial dress floating in the air. And there are kids throwing rocks at her because they're scared of her. And she's bleeding, like, symbolically, even though she's a ghost. And I'm thinking all this stuff, like, this image is in my head. And my son is right. You know how when you're writing, you zone out? My son's right in my ear, and he goes, "Dad." And I go, "What?" And he goes, "I need Red Bull." I go, "You're 13 years old. What do you need Red Bull for?" He goes, "Well, Nick and Will are over for a sleepover, and the first guy who falls asleep gets oatmeal in his shorts." And I'm like, I have my rock throwers, right? And what I did was I just made a whole story around that image. That the girl floating in the rocks comes 2/3 through the whole book. But the thing is, about 3.
Did we lose him?
Oh no, he froze up.
Yeah, he did. He was having trouble earlier with Zoom.
Oh man.
No.
Oh, the story was.
I was like
good.
right in the grip of the story.
There he is.
He's back. Okay.
Oh no. Did I
fade it out for a second? Go ahead.
You cut out right after the rock throwers.
Oh, okay.
Bloody Mary got you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So I figured it's 3 middle school kids. On the first night of snow, they all tell their moms they're going to the other guy's house. And
it's a classic.
Right. Yes. And Michael, the one playing my son, his dad is a grave digger. So Michael has access to the keys, and they go into the tool shed in the graveyard to tell ghost stories. And Mikey has the knowledge from his dad that they're, I don't know what the word is. I think it's aerating. They're giving air to a corpse that's not deteriorating fast enough. My Google searches for this were great, man, learning all this cemetery stuff. So they have mounting dowels up, and they're like, the body is being exposed, and they all go down to look at the body, and the spirit of the girl falls in love with Mikey and stalks him. And that's how that thing goes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, man. Thank you for listening to that long dissertation.
Bridget, do you have any other questions? I've got a couple of things when you're done.
Yeah, just on that note, I have to ask, what is the weirdest thing you've Googled in your authorship?
Oh, yeah, no problem. It was from that story, actually, because that's the only cemetery story I've done. I mean, in Hamlet, we know that it takes 8 years for a body to rot. That's if Shakespeare wasn't lying. I think it's a little quicker, but I've had to look that up. I did look up a question that always bothered me. If the bodies keep getting put in the boneyard, how do they not extend the borders? Where do they put all the bodies? And they honeycomb the caskets underneath the ground. Is that not the coolest shit you ever heard?
That is creepy cool.
Yeah, so I guess that's the weirdest.
So Kevin Lucia was involved with getting this book out, right? He's the publisher, or part of the publishing company, Cemetery Dance.
Yeah, he came in after it was accepted and kind of right when it came out. Norman Prentice is the guy who runs the electronic division, I guess, of Cemetery Dance, and he left there. I think I was the last book he accepted, and I knew him because Richard Chismar and Cemetery Dance had taken on the electronic rights of Alice Walks, the story that I just told you guys about, and Norman accepted the collection. And then he left, and Kevin, he said, "Mike, meet Kevin." And I want to say this on the air right now. I have never worked with an editor who works harder for his authors. Kevin is awesome.
He's also a wonderful writer in the vein of Charles Grant.
Who's Charles Grant?
Charles Grant. He was ask Kevin about him sometime. Okay. But he was a writer who, he just wrote a lot of quiet horror. He died in, I think, somewhere around the early 2000s. Pete, is that right?
I think so.
Yeah, let's look him up. If you like quiet horror, slow burn horror, that's the kind of stuff he writes, and that's a lot of the kind of stuff that Kevin writes.
I read October Nights.
But my point is, you're saying he's a great writer. I just wanted to say yes, and he's also editor. I also wanted to say he's a great writer as well.
Yeah, man. He kind of does it like Stephen King has Derry, and I hope I'm not wrong. I know he did it in October Nights. He kind of has Clifton Heights, New York, as his go-to place. He's
Charles Grant had a town called Oxford Station and a couple of other towns.
Oxford Station.
Thank you. But I do want to say that in addition to your book, Kevin's new book is now out, and it's called The Night Road. I do have that in the show notes, a link to that, and I haven't had a chance to get to it yet, but if it's written by Kevin Lucia, I know it's good. So
yeah, man. So. He communicates a lot. He's always posting on Facebook. Is he at the AuthorCon? I think
he just came from Scares That Cares.
Okay. He like I see on my Facebook, like his stuff comes up on my stream like almost automatically, because we put a lot of traffic through each other's stuff, and he shows me the cemetery dance table, and my book is there, and he says, I just sold a bunch of these. I mean, that feels good, man. That's somebody, that's somebody who cares. I mean, for me, every single sale means something. I mean, Bridget, you actually read half my book for this show. That is so cool. I do want to tell you, you've made a friend for life now. So,
if I remember right.
Well, I'm going to finish it after the show too. So I will say that for sure.
If I remember right, Kevin contacted Bridget about it, and Bridget told me that I really needed to get you on here because it was really good. So.
Oh man, thank you guys. That's so cool.
Guys, I gotta go for the night.
All right. Thanks, later. Pete. Yeah, and we'll wrap up soon too. But you have another book that you wanted to briefly chat about before we go. Not from Cemetery Dance, but from I lost my spot here.
Nightshade Skyhorse.
Yes, it's called The Sculptor. What's The Sculptor about?
Yeah, this is the extended version of the short story that's in the book Bridget is reading. That's the one where it's a serial killer who is a security guard on a college campus, and he works in a supermarket, and he disfigures the female co-eds and puts them on poles. Now, it's interesting, when I decided I was going to do a novel about this, I ended up putting a shorter version of that short story in the novel as a false manifesto. So it's misdirection, like kind of a purposeful red herring. The Sculptor is the first mystery I ever tried to write, except we know who the killer is on page 1. I do the backstory of Michael Leonard Robinson, who is the killer. And it's about his first kill when he's 7 years old. And in the present tense, all the co-eds on poles is backstory. And in the present tense of this book, after the origin story in the first chapter, our killer is coming back to Lower Marion, Pennsylvania, where he was raised, and he's taking on a police captain, his receptionist, a junior officer, and the junior officer's mother and sister. And he is going to create a pornographically violent scenario where no matter what anybody does, they get twisted into their own repressions and also suspicions of the other in the group. And it's weird because it really is a mystery, and the mystery is what the guy's going to do next to his victims psychologically. And literally the temporal issues were so difficult with this. And I'm not a math guy, I'm more of an emotional psychology guy. But I literally, in this room, every one of the characters I just mentioned, I had to storyboard their place in the night that it happens, because where they are and when they know what they think they know is so different for each one of them that I literally had to map out my entire room to make it make sense. And the criticism I've got on the piece is that the characters are hard to attach to because there's no real lead character. There's no hero. For me, the serial killer is the hero. I can't stand it when I go to panels and they go, "Oh, my serial killer, I hate him. He's so mean." Well, fuck it. Why'd you write him? I love my fucking serial killer, man. And whatever he's going to do is going to be the mystery. And I'm hoping that it surprises the reader just like it surprises the characters.
Well, I have chills already.
Yeah. I've got a link to that too in the show notes. Is that out now or is it coming out soon?
Yeah, man. Dancing with Tombstones came out in October. The Sculptor just came out March 29th.
Okay. Good timing.
And you know what's weird? They both were supposed to come out at the same time. But the shipping delays, with the stuff where the boats are in the port and they can't get stuff in, that affected Nightshade Skyhorse for some reason. And
that's actually good though, Mike, because from a promotional standpoint, you don't want to be competing against yourself.
Right.
It's good that it's staggered. So.
Yeah. And one thing that I tried a promotional thing that I've never heard anybody trying to do. And I don't really know if it was successful, but I sort of liked it. I told you that I write the bio reviews for the new signings that they put on the webpage for Eclipse Records. And I had done one for a Brazilian band called April 21st, and their album was coming out in September. And I thought the book was coming out in September. So we were still going back and forth with the galley proofs. It wasn't finalized yet. So I did 5 inserts. My dark hero in the Sculptor is a 10th grade metalhead named Megan Mullen. And originally I had her loving the sludge band Electric Wizard, but they've been around for a while and they're almost classic rock. And I thought, why can't she love April 21st and talk about that band in the book? And then, so we co-promoted a little bit and I reaped all the rewards because he was, their album came out in September. You know what I mean? So they were talking about this book, The Sculptor, that hasn't come out yet.
Nice.
So finally it did. But I was at my Zoom launch, a few nights ago, and Herbert, who's the lead guitar player, showed up, and it's all good. We're just going to go promoting from here. I've never been good at promoting. That's why I started writing rock reviews. In the 80s, I was in a glam band. I played the same clubs as Bon Jovi and Cinderella and Skid Row and all that stuff. I mean, my band opened for a band named Metal Wolf that had an album out. But I realized all of a sudden that, I got attitude, but I can't sing. So I got out of it. You know what I mean? But I've always loved music and I've always loved metal and stuff like that. So that's where that connection is. And look, I go on Facebook and Twitter and I tweet about my book and I get one like, I get one view. And I thought, what can I tweet about that means more to people? And as a professor, I teach students how to do an analysis, so why not do a fortification analysis for a band? And when I do something like that, I mean, it doesn't take me long. Fiction is a lot harder, because the structure is really different. There's dialogue, there's speaker attributions. How often do I use them? There's inner monologue and flashback and metaphor and all this stuff. When you do an analysis, it's block paragraphs, man. So I figure if I teach it, I better be able to do it. And I started doing reviews. And now, it turned into, I don't know how much I've really merged the two. I tried to with this promotion, but really they're separate things. But man, I love music.
That's awesome.
Bridget, you're like a composer and stuff.
I do.
Do you mind if I interview you for a minute?
Gosh.
And like all that in a bag of chips.
I suppose it's only fair.
Like what do you do with music? I love music.
Mm-hmm.
Music touches our hearts more than anything on a dusty page ever will. What do you do with music, man?
So my day job is that I am an Army band director.
I read that.
So yeah, as far as touching hearts and minds, I guess that's, really what we try to do, is try to bolster, the civilian support for its Army through telling the Army story. And so a lot of it is patriotic music, but a lot of it is playing a lot of other kinds of music too, to really reach people. So that's my day job, and doing a lot of conducting and analyzing of pieces and leading people. And then as far as writing stuff, my degree is in music composition, but I found that I did a lot more arranging for a lot of years. And then since I've been in the Army, I've been doing different compositions for my band whenever it suited the moment, I guess you'd say. But in recent years, and before coming onto this podcast, of just kind of thinking, well, who am I anyway? Having that crisis of like, what could I create if I just created whatever I wanted to create it, and not necessarily what needed to be, filling a void in the moment. And so
what will your verse be?
Yeah. And getting more. So that's more where I've gotten into this, just really writing spooky music and thinking about spooky stuff, and then getting onto this podcast and meeting all these amazing people and becoming friends with this great group. And yeah.
Well, I'm really glad you're here. You've been here, what, 2 years now?
A little over that. Yeah, crazy.
And I think a lot of Bridget. I think a lot of her husband. On a personal note,
Mike, if you want to join this really cool group like Bridget did, it's an entry fee. That's all. Just
what cool group?
Yeah, what group are you talking about?
I'm talking about hang out with the eZine pals, man. It's just there's a buy-in. I don't think anyone's told you about, but
I don't think anyone's told me about it either, because nobody's giving me any money.
He's like, what is he talking about?
Oh, by the way, I was going to say.
Yes.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, I know you had a question.
This is going way back into discussion after Bridget talks about all this wonderful patriotic music. You're asking body decay. Well, I'm a physician, and I've actually read a lot about the history of medicine. And
some of his patients even have lived.
Some of but you got to look up, if you haven't. There's a place, I think it's in Kentucky or Tennessee, and there's other places in the world, called a body farm, where people donate their body to science. And what they do is they take the body, they throw it out in the woods, and they let it decay, and they monitor the decay for like what happens in sequence, like what insects come first, what insects come second. Can you tell how old a body has been out there based on where it is, and what are the kind of maggots that are thriving on it? What happens like if small predators get at the bones?
Maggots? What does this have to do with this show?
Well, he was talking about like a body decay, like how long does it take? And actually,
I thought you were trying to compare maggots to the podcast or something.
No, actually, I have seen myiasis.
But to be fair, I wasn't listening.
Okay, I have seen myiasis in real life, and that's a treat. And that's when a living person has a wound that's infected with maggots. But really great. They fall out and crawl. But if you wanted to like interest in like for your research and you really want to screw up your search engine you may want to look at some things about like these body farms. And there are also books about them where they talk about how this information was then used to crack cases with forensics.
Yeah,
it's kind of like listening to patriotic music and feel good stuff, except, you know, it's not.
Not even
Not
close.
too.
yeah. And what's funny is it depends on kind of the context of the story, how deep you want to go with something like that. Sometimes that stuff is just kind of periphery, and sometimes it is the whole story. I'm going to tell you, kind of going along those lines, the thing Bridget, in Toll Booth, this was a major concern. And I'll kind of throw it this way. I don't write cops well because I don't know them. I don't know where the desk sergeant sits and what his job is. What is the hierarchy of people that you see when you enter the station? Where's the equipment room? Where's the locker room? Where do they keep the guns? Now in Toll Booth, there's a murder and cops are going to come into it probably a little later in the piece than you are. And the way I handled it was through a boy's point of view who was in shock.
That was brilliant. You know, you were like, my memory is not, so I don't know if this happened in the time stream or in the time stream.
So he only had flashes of like a bad coffee pot that smelled like it.
And you know, that's very realistic too, Mike.
Yeah.
What would a boy remember? He's in shock.
Yeah,
ultra shock.
Right, but when I wrote The Sculptor, I couldn't do that, because one of my lead characters is the captain of the police department. So what I did was it's always tough asking people who are like asking you guys for information. I would get like Matt's answer, like more than everything I would need. No. But he tells me how I can get my information. Have you ever tried asking somebody who's not a writer, well, what would somebody do if a zombie came out and chomped you on the neck? They're like, no. And I'm like, please, just trust me. I'll make it work. Just give me the facts. And I asked, like, for The Sculptor,
Wait. I'm sorry. The facts and zombie attacks. Got it.
Right.
Stephen King once asked a doctor friend, how much could a person eat of his own body to stay alive?
That's a logical question.
Yeah.
And so many people say, wait a minute, why are you asking that? I don't know.
I know what story that is too.
It's not my favorite Stephen King story. Yeah.
No, you're talking about Survivor type. That's where the guy eats himself.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
And the last line is, I see the lady fingers. And the most important thing to him was keeping his fingers cool because he's a doctor. Yeah, man. I love that story. I love a good cannibal story, man. Come on.
You should read N. It's in Just After Sunset. I want to say, first of all, thanks for coming on here. Thanks to Bridget for making me aware of this, and to Kevin Lucia. I do have a TBR list. Of course, our guest is Mike, and his books are at the top. Check them out. That's why we have him on here. And then I've started this, since my main complaint about this show is that the TBR grows, the faux complaint. I decided to make it official. So each time I'm going to have a list of books with the links to buy. Now, I've mentioned some of them, but I just want to point out a couple. Again, The Night Road by Kevin Lucia is on there. Laurel Hightower, who I think so much of as a writer and as a person, just came out with a book called Below, and I've got the link to that too. Her first book was just a real gut wrencher, especially if you're a parent. And I emailed Larry earlier, and he said, why don't you add a book called The Black Maybe? And funnily enough, 10 minutes before, I had just returned the publisher's email about that. But it's called The Black Maybe by Attila Veras. I'm probably not saying that right. And I've got a link to it. It's a pre-order link, but
okay, now
it looks perfect. And Laird says, horror collection in the vein of Legati, Paget, and maybe traces of Ketchum. Coming soon from Valancourt. What, Matt?
See, my big issue is, like, if that guy were on the show, we would greet him like, "Hi, hun." Name's Attila. Never mind.
That's the worst dad joke I've ever heard.
Oh, he's had worse.
I think those are the ones I wanted to point out. But every one of these I have on here, I have because I put thought into them, I guess is what I'm trying to say to the audience. So check them out, see which ones work for you, see which ones don't, you know. Also, Matt made a joke a little while ago about paying in to be on the show. Actually, you know, you can be a Patreon at as low as $5 a month, you know, and then you get extra podcasts, you know, like the scarier one with Laird and the one with Rick and I are going to do a Patreon podcast with Will Murray this coming Thursday, things like that, all kinds of cool things. But that's the cheapest, and you still get a bunch of cool stuff. You go up to the $10 level, to the $25 level, you get more. And at the $50 level, the reason why I bring this up, and I don't usually, is if you're a $50 a month patron, you can actually be a guest panelist here once a month, and you're supporting the eZine. So not all of us can afford $50 a month, and I realize that. But I just wanted to answer the question since it was asked, and it's a good opportunity to let people know. So,
Mike, could you send me the information on that?
Sure. I'll do it after we're done. I'll email it to you, but just for it is in the show notes, and you can go to lovecraftezine.patreon.com. It'll take you right to it, or just Google Lovecraft eZine Patreon. But I'll email you the link when we hang up here, when we're done here. And thank you for asking. So, Matt, you have a prize.
Remember, if you want to win, this is actually...
This is shit you get without even being a Patreon, man.
You could actually use this to guide your reading of early 20th century horror and supernatural literature. It's H.P. Lovecraft's famous treatise, The Supernatural Horror in Literature.
This is pretty good synergy here, since ST introduced this book that we were talking about with Mike, Dancing with Tombstones, and now you've got this ST Joshi annotated book.
Email ezineprizes@gmail.com and put HPL in the subject heading. We draw a winner in about 6 weeks.
So, all right. Did we forget anything? Rick, do you have anything to add? No? All right. In $5 and up Patreons, Rick and I are going to talk to Will Murray live this Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern. And of course, just like this Sunday show, you don't have to be there live if you don't want to be. You can watch it later, or I do the audio. I send the audio to the patrons later as well. Mike, thanks for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on. Nice meeting everybody, man. And
Bridget, thank you for introducing me to this book and for interviewing Mike. Really appreciate it.
Oh, happy to.
So, and
thanks,
Matt,
Mike.
Rick, really appreciate you guys. Pete, I know is gone, but thanks for being here, Pete, if you're still listening. I think that's it. Did I forget anything? I do want to say in public, not what it's about, but I want to say to Bridget and her husband that you guys helped me and my wife really a lot personally this weekend. I appreciate it.
I'm glad.
So anyway, thanks for being here, everybody. Nice to meet you more or less in person, Mike, and we will see everybody next week. Have a good night.
Thank you, guys.